We've learnt up till now that we can assign macros or code to an object, such as a shape. We can also assign it to a shortcut key. And we can also assign things to the quick access toolbar and the menu. But sometimes we don't want to assign a macro to any type of object. We just want a macro to run or code to run automatically when a certain event occurs. That event might be when we open the file, when we go to print the file, when we close the file, or even when we move between sheets. In which case, you want to assign your code or your macro to an event procedure. I'm in the file Chapter 13 done, and I've saved it as Chapter 14. I'd like to go into my Visual Basic Editor, and I might press Ctrl R or go to View and turn on the Project Explorer. Up till now, all of our code and macros have been sitting in modules, but there are these objects listed here, and it is possible to assign code or macros to these objects. There are Worksheet event procedures and Workbook event procedures. Let's start, for example, with the Workbook event procedures. For this, you would go to this workbook, and in fact, you double-click this workbook. When you double-click this workbook and you go over to here where it says General, you can hit the drop-down and you can choose Workbook. If you then go over here for this drop-down, which is Procedures, you will see a number of event procedures. All of these are triggers. So before close would be a trigger that I would assign a code or macro to if I wanted that code or macro to run before the file was closed. If I wanted to assign code to before the file was printed, I choose this one, before it was saved, and so on. If I inserted a new chart, inserted a new sheet, or even if I opened the file, I could assign code that automatically ran. And so there's a number of event procedures that you can choose from. Let's say I wanted to ensure that if the workbook was printed, that it would automatically set up the page setup. So I'm going to go to Before Print. Immediately I'm given this private sub procedure, an end sub, and I can actually get rid of this one, which appeared by default. Within this sub and end sub, I would say what I wanted to happen before it was actually printed. And so I might create a with statement. So I'll put with the active sheet, full stop, page setup. Within there, I might say I'd like to set the orientation of the page to equal landscape. And end with. Let's try this for starters. So if any sheet should be printed, irrespective of its current settings, this particular code will say before it's printed, change it to landscape. So I'm going to go back to my Excel file now, and I'm going to go into Print Preview. What I see here is the page is actually portrait. But if I was to choose a printer, and I was to actually print, and bring that up, you would see that it ultimately will print in landscape. Let me just bring it into view for you. And there it is there. Let's close that, and let's choose a different sheet. This sheet here, for example, has been told to print in portrait, but if I go Print Preview, there is the portrait, but when I actually print, and I view it, you can clearly see it's in landscape. So it doesn't matter what its default settings are. When it goes to print it, it will change those to whatever we choose. So let's elaborate. Not only do I want it that the page setup has to be landscape, but I'm also going to set the left footer. I would like the left footer to be the active workbook's full name, which is its path and its file name. I'd also like the right footer to equal the date, and that is the current date. but I'd like it formatted in a certain way with a full day. The day again is a number, a full month, 3 Ds, 3 Ms, comma, and 3 Ys, or 4 doesn't hurt. So I'd like the right footer to show today's date, but formatted with a full day, like Wednesday, the second, a full month, like February, and the year, like 2017 in full. I'd also like the centre footer to show me the page of the total number of pages. And that's how you'd write that. So I'm going to do a save. I'm going back to my Excel. I'll go back to chart data and I'll do a print preview. I can clearly see that landscape has now been adopted, but the headers and footers haven't been adopted, and that is because I actually have to print. So you can see that they're clearly not there, but as soon as I go print and bring it into view, you can see clearly there is the full active workbook's full name and path. You can also see the date, which I need to correct, and you can also see a big mess in there, which I might tidy. So let's do a tidy. I'll close this, I'll go back to my Visual Basic Editor, and let's say I'll put 4 Ds, 4 Ms, 4 Ys, and I might decide that the center header will host the page numbering, only because the location that I've got this particular file residing in is a rather long path and it's struggling to show the left footer and the center footer on the same page. So I'll save, go back to Excel, go to print preview, my old changes are there, I'll go print, and clearly you can see that my changes have been made. Except I need to tidy this up still. But you can see the idea. There's page 1 of 1, there's the date now with a full Friday and a full month, and here's my path here, a rather long path. So I'll close that and go back to my Visual Basic Editor. So that's the whole idea. I can actually assign code to a workbook and say when a workbook closes, before it does, do this. When a workbook saves, before it does, do this. Or when a workbook prints, or when a workbook opens. Sometimes though we want to assign code to a worksheet. Let's say I double click on sheet 1, which is chart data. I then change general to worksheet, and here are all the worksheet event procedures. Starting from the top, you've got procedures such as before I delete a sheet, before I change a sheet, before I leave a sheet and deactivate it and go to another sheet, or before I activate a sheet and that is select it, before I follow a hyperlink, and so on. Let's say that whenever I deactivate this sheet, that is move away from this sheet, I want it to automatically save the workbook. So I can remove this particular default statement, and within these sub and end sub statements, I'll put active workbook, full stop save. And that will automatically save the workbook every time I move away from the sheet called chart data, particularly if I have users that seem to be losing data all the time. So to see the consequences, I'll save, go back to Excel. As soon as I move away from chart data, you'll see a quick little shuffle appear on the status bar, which implies that the file's been saved. So I'll click on chart data 2016, chart data 2016. You can just see it. I'm clicking back and forth in the hope that you can see it. It's very quick because it's not a large file, but I can assure you that every time I deactivate that sheet, it is saving that file. So event procedures are very, very useful if you want your code to automatically run when a certain event occurs and not when a person clicks a button or presses a key combination.